Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I hope you are doing well. On the show today, I want to discuss a concept called Bhoga. Now, you've heard of yoga before, but there is another concept of Bhoga. And as yoga teachers and yoga practitioners, we don't know much about Bhoga, but understanding this will help us understand yoga a little more in context. And since we are heading into a celebratory season across the globe, we just wrapped up Diwali and then there is Thanksgiving and the Christmas season hits. So I thought this would be a very timely conversation for us to have. But before we get into all things Bhoga, I wanted to remind you that my pranayama teacher training and immersive study program is now available. This happens every year and 2023 is now waitlisting. If you are a yoga teacher and you're looking to, not just a teacher, it'll apply to yoga students as well, and you're looking to learn pranayama in a structured, concise, deep manner where you can understand it, practice it, and then for those of you who want to teach it, be able to offer it with clarity and confidence, then do explore my pranayama study program. The enrollments for this one are opening on December 1st. The course starts early January, but I will be closing enrollments at the end of December. Okay, so make sure you check out all those details. I will be offering an info session as well. I'll talk to you about that in another episode, but you can find the link in the podcast description, the show notes, my Instagram handle, and even our newsletter. And you know the drill of how this works when it comes to finding these links. Okay, so let's get on with today's show about Bhoga. Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a six-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. The word bhoga comes from the root word bhoj, which means to enjoy or to consume. Now, this is usually attached to another concept from Hinduism and Sanatana Dharma called tyaga. Tyaga means renunciation. Okay. So in many ways, I think of bhoga and tyaga as two ends of the spectrum. Okay. But in this conversation, I'm going to be contrasting yoga and bhoga as none of us are really renunciates living that life. Okay. So bhoga has undertones of attachment. Our attachment to our desires, wishes, pleasures, sensory indulgences, and our inherent need to enjoy the world through our senses. Now, this isn't completely a bad thing. In fact, we have the 4 stages of life according to Sanatana Dharma, the Purushartha system. Now, we've done an episode about this in detail with Savira Gupta earlier in the podcast series. I will link that in the show notes for you. So make sure you go and listen to that one, because there's an entire phase of life that is dedicated to enjoying worldly pleasures and indulging in your senses. But the key factor here is that it should be done in a dharmic way. Now, by that, I mean it has to be done in accordance with your dharma. We've had conversations about what is dharma on the podcast before, so I won't elaborate about dharma itself. But essentially, when we step away from our dharma and we overindulge in bhoga and enjoyment, it takes us away from our true self. So in many ways, you go away from bhoga and indulge more in yoga. Okay, yoga is about detachment, whereas bhoga is about attachment. Yoga is about moderation and balance, whereas bhoga is about indulgence. So there are traps to our spiritual life when we overindulge in bhoga. Some of the traps are, there are four that I could think of. One is attachment and suffering. Okay. When we are overly attached to things, people, sensory or dopamine hits, we end up being attached to the material world. Okay. The more attachment you have to the material world and the people around you, the more dukkha you could potentially face. Now, dukkha in English is referred to as suffering. And one of the central premises of yoga is dukkha nivritti, which is alleviation of suffering. Now, there are 5 types of suffering when you are bound to this world. Those 5 are physical suffering, mental suffering, emotional suffering, spiritual suffering, and even karmic suffering. Okay. It is very easy for you to come up with examples in your own head for some physical suffering, mental, emotional, spiritual, and even karmic suffering. Okay. So one of the main issues with too much bhoga is our attachment, and as a result of which we end up suffering a lot more. The second problem there with bhoga is it distracts us from our higher self and our spiritual goals if we have any. Okay. I think this is self-explanatory when it comes to our spiritual work and the goal of yoga. But essentially, when you're constantly just indulging and just being a slave to your senses and the material world, you are completely disconnected from your higher self, which is in many ways, according to yoga, full, complete, and doesn't need anything else. Okay. Thirdly, this can have, too much bhoga can have a negative impact on your health. Now, I don't need to tell you about what eating too much food will do, what overuse of your devices, consumption of certain substances, certain things like that. When there is too much indulgence, okay, it can have a negative effect on our health. Just look at the world we live in. Okay, look at all the diseases we have, look at the lifestyle, look at our obesity numbers, our cardiovascularity numbers, our stress levels. Just there is so much negative impact on health. And then lastly, we tend to disregard ethical conduct when we indulge too much in our senses. Okay, this is sadly not spoken about a lot. For example, social media, right? We sometimes take someone's pictures and content and plagiarize it. Okay, we could be cheating on a loved one. Okay, we're treating someone with absolutely no respect. All of these are considered to be going against your yamas and niyamas in many ways. I'm just giving you very simple examples. There are much stronger examples around you in the world right now, but I want to keep this really simple. Okay. So there is no regard for ethical conduct and character. Okay. When you are so driven by your senses and dopamine hits and bhoga itself. Now, indulgence is not new. Okay. The yogis knew about this thousands of years ago, and they warned us about it. And they said there are many kinds of bhogas. Okay? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has 56 bhogas, but I'm not going to go into those. We will talk about 6 bhogas here. The 6 types of indulgences that we have to watch for, that are red flagged, are the kama bhoga. Kama means lust. Okay, in this context means lust. Again, I've said many times in this episode, indulgences aren't bad. Just do them in your dharmic way and do them in a way where you stay committed to that particular person. Okay, it is in yoga, sexual energy is linked to spiritual growth and spiritual ascendance. The ojas, okay, which I know we've discussed in a previous episode, moves up through the Sushumna Nadi, okay, and is meant to not be used carelessly, okay. I won't be able to provide enough context in this episode. We'll do this and we'll talk about it another time. But it is not meant, sexual energy is not meant to be just spent for the sake of sensory indulgence. For renunciates specifically, they led a life of abstinence so they could convert this energy expenditure and push it into their spiritual work, okay, and send it there so they were more vibrant in their spiritual sadhana. Okay, so the first bhoga is too much of kama. The second bhoga is krodha. Okay? Krodha in Sanskrit means anger. Okay? I mean, look at the world right now. There's literally war going on in certain parts of the world. So the damage that anger can do is tremendous. Okay? And it brings so many people into harm's way. And it goes against our tenet of ahimsa. So the second bhoga is krodha bhoga. The third bhoga is lobh bhoga. Okay? Lobh is greed. And so many times people cheat to make money, right? Or to get ahead in life, whether it's a promotion, an opportunity. Cheating for many people is a way of life. Okay. And I like to sometimes think of it as two different things. There is crime of privilege and there is crime of opportunity or need. If someone is starving and they have no roof over their heads and they're living in deep poverty and they steal a meal from somewhere, okay, that is very different than someone who's already extremely privileged and has enough and more comfort, and yet they try to cheat somebody and try to make more money and are just greedy for the sake of being greedy. Okay. So the fourth bhoga there is moha bhoga. Moh means attachment. When we are overly attached to a point where we can't function, where it becomes dysfunctional, okay, it can show up in how we look, how we breathe, how we show up in the world. Okay. You could be attached to your physical body and your appearance. You could be trying to behave in a certain way or control a certain situation. You want things in a certain way. Okay. It just, attachment shows up in many different places in our life. Okay. And we've spoken about raga, dvesha on the podcast before. That layers itself into this. So if you see, all of these are intertwined and interlinked. The last two bhogas are ahankara bhoga. Okay. Ahankara is ego. Okay. When you are overly attached to your ego, you operate from there. This, I want it this way. I said it, so you have to do it this way. It's that I factor, which can, being too focused on yourself, can put you in harm's way. Okay. As well as others. And then lastly, the last bhoga is irsha bhoga. Irsha bhoga is the bhoga of jealousy. Okay. If you operate in the world completely jealous of everything and everyone around you, then you are stealing from yourself. Okay. And this could potentially not help you ascend spiritually. So the 6 bhogas are kama bhoga, krodha bhoga, lobha bhoga, moha bhoga, ahankara bhoga, and irsha bhoga. So the contrast to dealing with all of these bhogas is our yoga practice. Okay. And not the asana practice that we do. Yes, that will help. But the 4 margas of yoga: karma marga, jnana marga, bhakti marga, okay, raja marga. Okay. So these 4 paths of yoga, and we've done an episode with Uma Subramaniam on the 4 paths of yoga. I will have that link in your show notes. So the answer to dealing with our bhogas and our imperfections is to lean more into the yoga itself. And I would go so far as to extend it into the yamas, the niyamas as well. And to really, every time we catch ourselves indulging, okay, indulgence is not bad. I want you to hear that, especially because we're going into celebratory season. And everybody in the studio keeps complaining to me about, oh, I'm going to eat this much, I'm going to do this much, I have to. But no, there are seasons in life where we celebrate, as long as that just doesn't become our way of life. Okay. So we have these ebbs and flows. We will have these moments where we celebrate and then we go back to life, and then we celebrate and go back to life. Okay. So this celebratory season prompted me to make this little bhoga episode for you. And as we head into the holiday season, I'd like to leave you with a few things that are not necessarily yoga itself, but things I have been repeating at the studio repeatedly. Okay. Celebrate without guilt. Indulge without guilt. There is nothing wrong in skipping an asana class once a week for a couple of weeks and making space to spend that time with loved ones. Okay. That is important too. That is needed for our heart and soul in many ways. Okay. And when it comes to food, please don't count your calories. Okay, count your blessings instead. There are so many millions of people in the world who do not have safe water to drink or food to eat. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. So you and I, all we have to do is be grateful and remind others to be grateful. Okay, if there is food in front of us, a lot of food in front of us, let's be grateful about it. Okay, my personal favorite is the 3 R's. I call them reduce, replace, and then refuse. For food, if you want to not indulge in something, okay, reduce it first. If you want to reduce a certain type of food, say sweet or alcohol, okay, just reduce it first. Don't just try to remove it, eliminate it. I don't know why people start thinking of their food habits and diets and other practices during a celebratory season. That's the worst time to do it. It's like trying to swim upstream when you don't know how to float. Okay. So reduce whatever you think you need to. That is only if you want to. When I look at this holiday season, there's nothing I need to reduce. Okay. Because I believe I already live in a little more food balanced type of system. But I have students who after Diwali came and told me, oh my God, I ate so many sweets and this and that. So just reduce and replace it with a healthier option if possible. Okay. And then finally, if it's not working for you, it's going against all your goals and principles, just refuse, but refuse kindly. Okay, especially in Indian families, I know that they don't take no for an answer, and feeding you till you are stuffed is quite literally a way of expressing love. So just learn to refuse kindly. Okay, social pressures will always be there. Get ahead of it. Make your dietary requirements very clear, your intentions very clear. For example, I tell everybody ahead of time, I don't do sweets, I don't do desserts because I'm lactose intolerant. Okay. And I also don't have a sweet tooth. So I let people know that ahead of time and that I would just be skipping it. Okay. Family pressures will be there, especially if you are in those cultures like mine, where if you say no to something that was made, sometimes people will get offended and take it personally because they spend so much time and effort preparing that for you. Okay. So make sure you have a plan of action. Okay. It doesn't mean that you value them any less. It's just that you are maintaining healthy boundaries around food, fitness, and your wellness goals. And in your yoga classes, when people talk about food and indulging, be a beautiful, liberating, freeing presence and reminder that this is just a passing season. Adopt a holiday attitude, enjoy it, and they can always reset on the other side. And I always make jokes about Bhoga and yoga. I'm like, go do all the Bhoga you want and then come back for the yoga. So I hope this lighter episode is helpful. Okay. The takeaways for you are the entire concept of Bhoga, and the answer to your Bhoga is in your yoga, the different types of Bhoga and how it keeps you trapped in the material world. And that's it. We've never had a conversation about Bhoga on the podcast. So I just thought I'll come and drop this here. That's it from me. I will see you soon next week with another episode. But remember, the pranayama teacher training is now available, and in a couple of weeks will be open for enrollments. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to leave us a review, a rating, share it with a friend. It always makes such a difference to us when you do. I will see you soon. Until then, take care, my friend. Bye-bye.